Few questions. Who here has or is developing reusable components? Okay, cool. Okay. Then you might recognize the following question. How did you optimize those components to have the most ideal responsive layout? JavaScript. No, not today. Did you use media queries, or did you provide configuration options like design tokens or properties, React properties to that component? And if these questions do not ring any, I cannot stand here. If these questions do not ring any bells, don't worry, in the next 30 to 40 minutes, I'll try to explain what problems that we face right now as front-end developers when building reusable, robust components. And I'm going to explain to you how to do that in CSS with a new CSS feature. That's my name. I'm Maarten, and I'm a front-ender and developer advocate at I/O. All right. I/O is a digital full-service agency that works end-to-end. That means that if you have a company that wants to do digital things in the broadest sense of the word, then we're the people to help you along, whether it be strategy, communication, content creation, and technology. Did I pronounce them all correctly? Yeah, okay, yes. Marketing happy, cool. And being at I/O, working at I/O, I worked on a lot of different types of projects. Web applications, websites, blog posts, anything that has to do with CSS, everything on the web, basically. And most of the time, when I was developing on the website, the same question popped up. I have this component, and I want to reuse it throughout different pages. And every time I have to use it throughout those different pages, I had to write extra CSS to get the most ideal layout. Let me try to visualize the problem. Here we have an admin UI, and there's a bunch of widgets on this admin UI. For instance, a bar chart showing my favorite pies, and a pie chart showing my favorite candy bars, a weather widget, and some sort of user list laid out as a table. And I've been given the assignment to create this. And a few of the requirements are that as a user, I want to see less or more information depending on the size of the widget, and that on the dashboard page, I want to be able to choose the size of a widget. And as a developer, I want to reuse the same widget, the same component throughout different layouts. For instance, we had the weather widget become larger. When it becomes larger, we have more space available and we can show more information. For instance, here we add the expected precipitation and the upcoming temperatures, for the upcoming dates. How would we translate this into code? Well, first of all, we might think of using media queries. So this widget is full width at the mobile, at the base. We're working mobile first. And then at a certain breakpoint, it gets to the half of the width, and then at another breakpoint, it gets to 1/3 of the width. But then I want to reuse that component on a different page with a different layout. So I have to write extra media queries or extra breakpoint. I have to take extra breakpoints into account. And when we combine those things, we have to write a certain selector to target that page or that specific layout. And of course, another page shows up. And we have to even write more CSS. And another page pops up. And yeah, you know the gist by now. So with media queries, we're limited to querying only the viewport. And thus, it gives us insufficient flexibility to write concise styling. Well, second option is that we could use configuration options. For instance, I marked up the dashboard, sort of pseudo code-ish, the bar widget, pie widget, the weather widget, and I give the weather widget the size large. And then in my CSS, I target that specific size and do something with the layout and the style. But then again, on the other, it has to be responsive first. And then we have to write media queries and target each size again. And then those pages pop up, and then I even have to write more CSS. And I do not want to do that because I'm a developer, so I am lazy. And providing these configuration options puts the responsibility into our end user's lap. So that means I myself, the developer of that component, do not know where that component might end up. It might be external developers. So I have to provide some sort of documentation or examples on how they could provide the most ideal responsive solution in their product. Can we do that automatically? We could do that with JavaScript. Yay, JavaScript. For instance, there's a web API out there called the resize observer, and what it does is you handle an element, and when that element resizes, you can perform all kinds of business logic on it. This example, for instance, when a widget changes size and its width is larger than 640 pixels, we'll add a class, and when it's smaller, we'll remove that class. And that's pretty cool, but if we have paid attention during HTML 101, we do not want to load our JavaScript up front or in a way that it blocks the rendering of our page. Nowadays, we want to load in our JavaScript asynchronously as much as we can. And that means when CSS is loaded in before the JavaScript, we might get a flash of unstyled content. If that does not ring any bells, let me give you an example. This is an empty browser window. We just press enter when typing in the address, and then our markup is loaded in, and then our CSS is loaded in, and our user sees the first CSS, and then the JavaScript is evaluated, and then bam, the layout changed. And that's not something that we want for our users, and that's not something that we want for Google, because this is called, I believe, a LCP, a large contentful paint. So we want a solution in CSS, something that gives us the correct styling straight away. Luckily for us, something has landed in the browsers over the course of the last month. Not this slide, not that slide, but this slide. Container queries. So we want something in CSS that takes this widget, that we can separate it from all the styles from those pages, put it with the widget itself, with the component itself, and that we can package it by itself and then reuse it throughout those different layouts, any layout, according to the space available with container queries. Anybody already heard of container queries? Okay, cool. For those who don't know, let me show you what they are. Back first. Container queries are a way of just like the resized for then in CSS, saying I have this element and I want to style parts of that element according to the dimensions of that element. And we got here, no, let's rewind. And we've been talking about container queries for pretty much a decade now, since responsive web design came out, and since component-based architectures popped up like React and Vue, we wanted a way to query dimensions of an element itself, not just a viewport. And it's only thanks to rebuilds of the layout engines in browsers and the CSS containment specification that is now in draft that we have the opportunity to use container queries in our projects. So what is CSS containment? Well, it's a way of improving rendering performance on certain elements by doing DOM subtree isolation. So we're saying to our browser, hey browser, look at this element, look at its size, layout, or style, and do something, pay extra attention to that. And it's that isolation that enables us to have container queries. And going a little bit back and forth on how we should name the properties of container queries. Should we use containment or should we use something distinct? The CSS working group is working on the specification, has chosen to give it a distinct container or container name and container type property because it's so important. Everybody wants container queries, am I right? No. So make it easy for developers. So the container is a shorthand for container name and container type. We first, if we use the shorthand, we first define our name and then we do a // and then we say the container type, in this case a size. What container name and container type does, I will show you in a second. But first let's start off with the type. The type is saying, okay, browser, look at these specifics of that element and do something with it. And for container queries, we can set the container type on size, which is the equivalent of inline size, block size, aspect ratio, which is both a computed value from inline size and block size, and orientation, which is a string that is from a computed value from inline size and block size. Or we just can say, hey browser, just look at the inline size of that element and forget the rest. And with normal, if we set normal as a value, we can remove containment if we set it earlier. And then when we have set size on a parent element, when we set containment on a parent element or an ancestor, we can then use the @container rule to query the dimensions of the ancestor, just like a media query. So in this example, we say, okay, when the minimum inline size is 400 pixels, then do something with the product body. And just like with media queries, we can use multiple conditions. So here we set the container type on size, so that we can both query the minimum inline size and the block size, and then our product body does something very special. I do not know what, but it's very special, I hope. An additional feature to container queries is that we can use multi-level querying. And there's where the container name pops in. So with the container name, we can give a name to the containment on the ancestor element. And then by using @container and then stating the name, we can target that specific element. In this case, product list has a container name list, and we target the product, the list, and then the product to something when the minimum inline size is 800 pixels. And same thing goes for that page element that is maybe a little higher up the DOM tree. The product, by filtering out on the folio, container name can do something. And you've already might have noticed, is that we have to set containment on an ancestor, on a parent element. Elements cannot query themselves. It's a limitation that they found out in layout engines. If we would allow elements to query themselves, we would end up with massive calculations, infinite loops, all hell broke loose, your laptop would be on fire and stuff like that. So that's not something we want. So remember, kids, put the containment on an ancestor. Is everybody still with me? Okay. Next to size container feature, container queries also gives us support for using container relative units. These are just like viewport relative units, where we say, okay, CQW, for instance, is a percentage of the container's width. We could do some interesting stuff with that, and I'll show you that in a minute. This example, the container type is set on the product. It's the size container type, and then a child or a grandchild, whatever, can use the container relative unit. For instance, here, the grandchild should be 100% of that product. This is a really cool slide, because I've been giving this talk for a while now, and every time I had to say, well, to use container queries, you have to download Chrome Canary or some other developer browser and enable a flag. Well, no longer, because in August, Chrome landed support for container queries in their 105 version. And also did Edge, and Safari 16 now also supports container queries. So if we think a little bit further and make the very broad assumption that because Chrome is a default browser on Android and it's automatically updated, and that iOS users are pretty good at updating their systems, there's already a ton of container query support in browsers right now, in mobile browsers right now. And if you want to support container query for browsers that do not support it yet, there's a polyfill out there, but it's based on that resize observer example that I showed you, and beware of for the flash of unstyled content. Hey. So what's in browsers? Those were the size container features and the container relative units. There's a few other things, part of the CSS containment specification which are under consideration. We don't know if they'll land it yet, will land in browsers or in the specification, but there's some cool things happening in the working group. So for instance, style container features. This is a feature that allows you to query computed styles on an element. For instance, when the product has a red background, then we style our product body differently. And also, state container features are in discussion. And here the example was, okay, I have this header in the middle of the page, and when I scroll up, it's sticky to the top of the web page, and I want to do something with that header when it's in its sticky state. But the proposition has differed, and maybe it will be replaced by the CSS toggle feature, which also is under consideration. So still work in progress. For our JavaScript aficionados here, just like the match media method, there will be a match container method. So in which you can pass container queries and do some JavaScript logic with that. So now that you know the syntax, now that you know what it's all about, what's available in browsers, what's in it for us? Let's go back to our widget example and let's refactor it to use container queries. So we see a little bit of markup up there. We have the page, whatever, and the dashboard and the weather widget and all the styles below. And then take into consideration, I have to write even more styles to be compatible with the layouts of all those pages. Let's first tear out the widget styles from the dashboard styles. So we put our dashboard styles or the end user application styles, put that separately, and the weather widget has to own all of their own styles. Still lots of CSS, but it's all concisely in the widget's responsibility right now. But we still have links to the page, whatever, and we do not want that. Like I said, containment has to be set on ancestors. We cannot query elements themselves, so we have to do a little bit of refactoring in the DOM, in the markup. And if we then set containment on the widget, then thanks to the use of container queries, we only have to look at the width of the widget itself. And we do not have to take in consideration anymore the page it's on, or the size it has been given, size as in the property. We just look at the dimensions of the query, of the element, of the widget itself. And this way, we use a whole lot of CSS. Container queries. That's basically it. And to make it more clear what container queries can do, I'm going to share with you a few experiments that are already online. So, what's my time? Let's see, okay, nice. So, marketing says we need a newsletter sign up on each and every page. We want it large on our homepage and we want it very tiny on our article page. Okay, let's just create one component, and then when it has much space available, then it's nice on one line, and when it gets smaller, it will adapt itself and lose a description at one point. Put the button below. Okay, it's pretty basic what I did here, the old responsive web design accordion, but it's its own component, and we can reuse that on this page and reuse that on that page. And we just have to say, okay, you're this big, and all the rest happens automatically. Another example that I think is useful for container queries is the usage of a shopping cart. So we're at this very awesome Why Lit is Lit web shop, and in the middle we see the product list with an image, description. Because these are web components, I can also implement some JavaScript business logic that calculates the subtotal from the quantity and the price, and the total price, and so on. And on most web shops, e-commerce websites, there's always that mini cart at the right top hand of the page. Well, why not reuse that shopping cart component just there, with all the business logic, with all the other stuff, and the styling and the layout has been handled by container queries. And we just say, okay, the dropdown for this mini cart is this high, this has this width, and voila, it will automatically resize itself thanks to the power of container queries. So I've talked about container relative units. Container relative units, a percentage of the container's dimension, of a container's dimension. Well, useful if you want to have flexible, oh, that's too much, flexible font widths or font sizes. So in this instance, in this example, every title, every piece of text uses a container relative unit and is just resized according to the width of that container. Hey, but you can also use viewport relative units for this, right? Well, if we not for the products themselves, because we have less width available for this product, so the font size should be smaller. That wouldn't happen with viewport relative units. And also when we make it a little bit bigger, we see that the title on top, the latest products, will stop resizing as soon as the container hits that maximum width. And with viewport relative units, it would just go on resizing unless you use clamp or something like that. But that's not there now. And an experiment that I wrote myself is, okay, I like to use inline SVGs because with inline SVGs I can recolor them according to my project. I also like dinosaurs. Oh, now I lost it. No, alright, that's the one. And within SVGs, we can write CSS, we can write styles. So what I thought, okay, then SVGs should work with container queries. And in fact, they do. It's a very simple example, but thanks to the power of container queries, this SVG will lose its outline on a certain breakpoint. And same goes for the other. Now think of the capabilities we have here in regards to responsive logos design, where you have that one logo when there's less space available or there's more vertical space available, that you have this typical emblem on top and logo type on the bottom, and when there's more width available, that you put the emblem on one side and the logo type on the other. You can automatically provide this within an SVG so that your developers just have to place it somewhere and it will have the right ratio or design according to that space available. So let's round it off, shall we? What did we learn today? Well, one, container queries, and they are very useful for modular front-end architectures where we can encapsulate adaptive stylings within a component, whether that be a React component, whether it be just CSS components. In browsers now, our size queries are container relative units. It's available in Chrome 105, Edge 105, Safari 16. There's a polyfill out there. Beware of the flash of unstyled content. And under active development are style queries and state queries. And if you now have something in your head, I have this awesome use case that I have not seen on these examples, well, go check out the specification, go check out MDM web docs. If they're out there, go check the internet if your use case exists. And if not, participate in the discussion of the CSS working group, because they're still looking for feedback on making that API more robust for certain use cases. And any examples on the internet right now are collected at the awesome container queries repository. And if I have been able to inspire you to do something with container queries, please share it with me. That's my Twitter handle. I'll put the slides up on my website. I think they're available right now. And what's also available are job opportunities at today's sponsor, IO. Thank you very much.